The world is alive with sound, scent, and motion. The air is crisp in the morning, carrying the faint musk of animals that passed through the night before. The ground, still damp with dew, holds impressions that most creatures overlook: tiny scratches, faint curves pressed into soil, blades of grass bent in a single direction. These are the secrets waiting to be read, and early humans are learning, for the first time, that the land itself whispers clues about survival. So before you enjoy the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now, picture them, a small band of hunter-gatherers, perhaps no more than 20 souls, living in a landscape that is both beautiful and unforgiving. They have no maps, no GPS, no guidebooks, but they are beginning to realize that every broken twig and every paw print is a map drawn directly on the earth. The dawn of observation has begun. At first, this discovery is more accidental than deliberate. A child might notice that a line of flattened grass seems to lead toward the river, and at the end of that line, the family finds fresh hoof prints pressed deep into the mud. Another day, a woman gathering roots may stumble across claw marks on the bark of a tree, sharp and vertical, and understand too late that a great cat has passed nearby. Fear sharpens memory, and memory becomes knowledge. Each accidental discovery plants the seed for something bigger: awareness that the movements of animals leave behind a trail that can be read. Over time, those scattered realizations take root. The hunters begin to connect the dots. If the ground is soft, the marks are clear, showing how many animals walked through and how recently. If the soil is dry, the tracks fade quickly, meaning the animals are long gone. They learn to notice how the morning air carries certain smells: musk from a herd of antelope, a faint metallic tang from blood left by an injured beast. The world is not silent, it hums with information, and slowly, early humans are tuning their senses like instruments. One historically accurate event highlights this shift. Archaeologists have found evidence in southern Africa, dating back over 70,000 years, suggesting that humans were already skilled in persistence hunting. This method required reading the ground and the wind for hours at a time, following the faintest marks until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Imagine the patience required, tracking not for minutes, not even for hours, but for entire days under the burning sun. If you've ever complained about following a friend through a crowded mall, you can appreciate the endurance it took to follow a single animal across a barren plain. But here's an odd little known detail: sometimes these early trackers weren't only looking down at the ground. They also paid attention to the behavior of birds circling overhead. A cluster of vultures, for example, could mean a dying animal nearby. In that sense, birds were like prehistoric drones, scouting the landscape and signaling opportunities without realizing it. It's not the kind of technology we'd brag about today, but it worked just as well, and it was entirely free. The dawn of observation brought a new way of seeing. To an outsider, the land may look like an endless wilderness. To these humans, however, it became a living notebook. They noticed how certain trees had their bark rubbed smooth at shoulder height, a sign that animals often brushed against them. They realized that a trail leading downhill toward a stream wasn't just random, it meant thirsty creatures passed through at predictable hours. And when they found droppings, yes, even poop, they could tell what species had passed, how recently, and even what the animal had been eating. Crocodile dung, for instance, could smell so strong that some early groups supposedly smeared it as a crude form of insect repellent. Picture that, the original sunscreen, made of crocodile poop. Not exactly a product you'd find on today's beauty shelves, but hey, it worked. Humans began to change how they walked through the world. They moved more slowly, eyes scanning the ground, ears tuned to distant sounds, noses catching faint odors. The dawn chorus of birds wasn't just pretty, it was a warning system. If birds suddenly went silent, it often meant a predator was lurking. If frogs croaked loudly near water, it meant the air was moist and animals might gather there. Every detail mattered. And with each new layer of observation, early humans gained confidence. No longer did they stumble blindly through their environment, hoping to bump into dinner. Instead, they approached the land like detectives at a crime scene, piecing together what had happened and predicting what would happen next. Each clue extended the reach of their senses beyond what their eyes alone could see. It was as if they had grown invisible threads connecting them to every creature that shared their world. Of course, mistakes were made. A faint line in the grass might be misread as a herd of deer, only for the group to find a family of warthogs waiting instead. And as anyone who has ever encountered a warthog knows, they're not exactly polite about being disturbed. Imagine expecting a quiet deer dinner and instead meeting a tusked tank that charges like a furry battering ram. Early humans quickly learned that not all trails were worth following. Still, each failure was a lesson. Each close encounter sharpened their awareness of patterns, the difference between a fresh track and a faded one, the difference between predator and prey. They began to carry stories back to the group, retelling what they saw in the landscape. Slowly, these stories became oral traditions, passed from elders to children. The land became both a classroom and a library, filled with knowledge that was not written but spoken and remembered. By mastering observation, early humans laid the foundation for everything else that would come: the art of stalking, the design of tools, the organization of group hunts. Without this first step, they would have remained blind wanderers, at the mercy of tooth and claw. But with it, they opened a doorway into a new way of life. And as the sun sets on this first part of their journey, the hunters rest by their fire, stomachs perhaps empty but minds full of new knowledge. They know that tomorrow, when they rise, the land will once again be waiting for them to read it like an open book. Only now, for the first time, they understand that they can. The trail stretches ahead like a puzzle scattered across the earth. A footprint pressed into soft mud, a snapped twig, a faint scrape on a rock, all tiny clues left behind by animals moving through the land. To most creatures, these marks mean nothing. But to early humans, they are starting to mean everything. Following the footprints is becoming an art form, one that demands more than sharp eyes. It requires memory, instinct, and a kind of imagination few other species possess. Picture a small band of hunters stepping cautiously into the morning light. Their spears are primitive, stone tips tied with sinew to wooden shafts, but their true weapon is perception. One man crouches low, brushing his fingers along the dirt. He notices the edges of the track are still sharp, not softened by winter time. That means the animal passed recently, perhaps only minutes ago. Another hunter squints toward the horizon, scanning for movement in the tall grass. They are not just walking forward, they are reading the earth, as if the landscape itself were whispering directions. There's a rhythm to it. Each clue builds on the last. A single footprint tells part of the story, but a line of prints reveals speed and purpose. Wide, spaced out steps mean the animal was running. Close, heavy imprints might mean it was limping or carrying weight. Even the depth of the track gives information. Light impression suggests a small creature, while deep, wide prints could belong to a massive animal, one that could feed the group for weeks or kill them in an instant. Here's a historically accurate moment worth pausing on. In southern Africa, the San people became legendary trackers. Their skills were so refined that they could follow an animal across bare rock, where no obvious prints existed. How? They noticed microscopic chips in stone where hooves had struck, tiny discolorations where a plant bent and straightened. To an outsider, it looked like magic. To the trackers, it was simply seeing the world more closely than anyone else. Archaeologists believe this tradition stretches back tens of thousands of years, making it one of the oldest surviving human skills. But not all trails were straightforward. Sometimes footprints overlapped, turning the earth into a messy scribble of crisscrossing lines. That's where scent came into play. Humans don't have noses as sharp as dogs, but they can catch the musky odor of antelope or the sharp stink of wild pigs when the wind carries it right. Early hunters learned to lift their heads, sniff the breeze, and let the air itself point the way. Think of it as a Stone Age version of turn left at the next traffic light. One odd but fascinating detail: trackers sometimes tasted the dirt. Yes, you read that correctly. If soil at the edge of a footprint was still moist, they could tell the animal had passed recently. If it was already dry and dusty, the trail was older. Imagine licking mud just to check if your dinner was still nearby. Not exactly a gourmet experience, but when survival is on the line, you take your seasoning where you can find it. Tracking wasn't just about following, it was about anticipating. Once they knew the direction of travel, humans began predicting where the animal might go. If the tracks angled downhill, it was probably heading for water. If they veered into thicker brush, maybe it was seeking shelter from the sun. This was a turning point. Instead of reacting to what animals had already done, humans started guessing what they would do next. In that moment, hunters stepped out of the role of passive observers and became strategists. Of course, not every prediction worked out. A group might follow a trail for hours only to find that their quarry had doubled back and slipped away. Worse still, they could discover that the tracks they'd been eagerly chasing belonged not to prey but to a predator. Imagine the sinking feeling of realizing those claw marks you've been admiring don't belong to an antelope, they belong to a lion that might be following you instead. It's the prehistoric version of accidentally joining the wrong WhatsApp group and realizing way too late. But even mistakes taught lessons. Hunters learned to tell the difference between hoof tracks and padded ones, between prey that fled and predators that stalked. They began to use broken branches as markers, leaving signals for others in the group. Over time, an informal system of communication developed, a shared language not of words but of symbols written directly onto the land. The process of following footprints also changed social roles. The best trackers became vital members of the community, prized not for brute strength but for patience and sharp observation. These were the detectives of the Stone Age, reconstructing events no one else had witnessed. Their skills determined whether the group ate well or went hungry. In a sense, tracking gave birth to a new kind of respect, intelligence measured in awareness rather than muscle. And there was beauty in it too. To follow an animal's trail was to step into its life, to imagine where it had walked, what it had seen, what dangers it might have faced. A hunter might kneel by a print and say nothing, but in his mind he was walking alongside the creature, feeling its weight, sensing its fear. In this way, tracking was more than a survival tool. It was an early bridge of empathy between species, a recognition that humans and animals shared the same paths through the same world. As the hunters pressed forward, guided by footprints, scent, and instinct, their world grew larger. No longer confined to immediate surroundings, they could project their senses outward, following trails that stretched miles beyond the horizon. Each successful hunt reinforced the lesson: the land was a book, and those who could read it held the power of life itself. And so, in this era of discovery, following the footprints became more than just a skill. It was the heartbeat of survival, the silent agreement between humans and the wild. One step in the mud could mean food, danger, or opportunity. But for the first time in history, humans weren't just wandering blindly. They were following the story written in the soil, step by step, toward a future only they could imagine. The chase was never quick. Tracking prey required more than sharp eyes and quick legs. It demanded endurance that stretched the limits of human patience. To follow an animal was to surrender to its pace, its habits, even its stubbornness. The prey might stop to graze, to drink, to rest, and the hunters had no choice but to mirror that rhythm, trailing silently at a distance. Every step was a negotiation between hunger and discipline, between the urge to rush forward and the wisdom of waiting. Imagine it, the midday sun blazes overhead, the ground ripples with heat, and the hunters march barefoot across hot earth. Their mouths are dry, their throats parched, yet they cannot break stride. The antelope ahead has no idea it is being pursued, but its movements write a constant story in the dirt. A cracked branch, a bead of urine staining the soil, a cluster of flies circling fresh droppings, all signs that the animal remains just out of sight. This was the patience of the hunt, a discipline that turned raw survival into an art. One historically accurate practice here is persistence hunting, an astonishing method humans perfected long before bows or arrows. Instead of ambushing prey with sudden force, hunters would simply keep following, mile after mile, hour after hour, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Why did it work? Because humans could sweat, and most four-legged animals could not. While antelope or zebra had to stop and pant in the shade, humans could keep moving under the brutal sun, cooling themselves with nothing but salty perspiration. It was biology weaponized into strategy, proof that patience could be more deadly than fangs. Of course, this wasn't glamorous. Imagine jogging for 6 straight hours without an energy drink, without music in your earbuds, without even comfortable sneakers. Just dust, sweat, and the hope that somewhere ahead, dinner is losing steam. If persistence hunting had been an Olympic sport, prehistoric humans would have been undefeated, though the medal ceremony might have just been gnawing on a leg bone instead of wearing gold. Oddly enough, patience also demanded silence. The hunters knew that a careless cough, the snap of a twig, or even the sound of rushing footsteps could alert the prey. So groups developed as hand signals, subtle nods, and quiet clicks of the tongue to communicate. In many ways, this was the beginning of nonverbal language, an unspoken system born not from art or poetry but from the desperate need to avoid startling dinner. If you've ever tried to sneak into the kitchen for a midnight snack without waking the whole house, you know the struggle. But the hunt wasn't just physical, it was mental. Hunters needed to maintain focus for hours, sometimes days, with no guarantee of success. The desert winds could erase tracks in minutes. Sudden rain could wash away every clue. An animal might veer into rocky terrain where footprints vanished altogether. These moments tested the will of the group. Do they continue on faith, trusting instinct, or do they turn back and face another hungry night? More often than not, they pressed on. Hunger as a way of silencing doubt. The patience of the hunt also reshaped the social structure of tribes. Not everyone could endure the long chase. Some stayed behind to gather roots, berries, or shellfish. Others prepared shelters or tended to children. The hunters, though, returned with stories of the chase that became part of oral tradition. Around evening fires, they would recount how the antelope slowed at the riverbank, how the tracks deepened near a patch of thorn bushes, how finally, the beast stumbled and fell. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were lessons encoded into memory, teaching younger hunters how patience carves a path to survival. And then there were the odd moments, the quirks of nature that tested the hunter's humor. Imagine following a trail for half a day, only to discover the tracks belonged not to an antelope but to a wandering ostrich. Feathers weren't exactly prime dinner for an exhausted hunting party, though an ostrich egg could feed an entire camp. It must have been like chasing a steak and ending up with a giant breakfast omelet instead. Disappointing, yes, but also oddly useful. Even predators required patience. Sometimes lions or hyenas stalked the same herds as humans, and the hunters had to wait until the danger passed. Attacking prey while competing predators lingering nearby was a recipe for disaster. So they learned to bide their time, letting other carnivores feed first before swooping in to collect scraps or chase off rivals. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. Think of it as history's first takeout service, waiting until the restaurant cleared before picking up leftovers. Patience, then, wasn't just endurance. It was flexibility, the ability to adapt to whatever twist the land offered. An unexpected storm? Wait it out under a rocky overhang. Prey doubling back? Circle wide and cut them off. A herd scattering in panic? Split into smaller groups and regroup later. Every situation demanded calm focus instead of rash action. Those who panicked failed. Those who persevered triumphed. As the day stretched into evening, the long shadow of the hunt deepened. Dust coated the hunter's skin, sweat stung their eyes, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. Yet still, they pressed forward, steady and relentless. The animal ahead could not comprehend what was happening. It only knew fatigue, only felt the burn in its muscles as it tried to escape. But humans had unlocked a secret no predator before them had mastered. Patience could be sharper than claws, longer lasting than teeth. And so, with each step across the unforgiving land, they proved a simple truth. Strength might win a battle, but endurance wins survival. In the silence of the chase, with the world reduced to footprints and breath, early humans found their most powerful ally, time itself. The world had shifted. Once, early humans wandered uncertainly through their environment, scavenging what they could and hiding from what they could not fight. But with the mastery of tracking and the rise of strategy, something profound had changed. They were no longer simply reacting to the wild, they were shaping it. The turning point of survival had arrived, and it would carry them into an entirely new chapter of existence. The hunters now moved through the land with confidence, their eyes trained to read every sign. A broken branch was no longer just an accident of wind, it was proof of passage. A cluster of fresh droppings meant a meal was nearby. Even the calls of distant birds became signals, warning of predators or pointing toward prey. To outsiders, the world might have seemed chaotic. To them, it was a symphony, and they were learning to conduct it. This shift brought with it an undeniable transformation. Humans became predators to be feared. Lions had strength, cheetahs had speed, crocodiles had jaws like traps, but none of them could match the patience, coordination, and planning that humans wielded. With every successful hunt, with every story shared at the fire, the balance tilted further. For the first time, humans stood at the edge of becoming apex predators, not because of brute force, but because of thought. A historically accurate event captures this moment. In northern Spain, at the site of Atapuerca, archaeologists uncovered evidence of cooperative hunting by early humans nearly 500,000 years ago. The remains of large animals, including bison, were found with signs that they had been deliberately herded into natural traps. This wasn't luck. This was planning. It was proof that by working together, humans could take down prey much larger and more dangerous than any single hunter could face. And here's an odd but fascinating detail: in some places, evidence suggests early humans may have deliberately set small grass fires to flush animals out of hiding or direct them toward waiting hunters. Fire wasn't a warmth or light anymore, it was a tool of control. Imagine standing on a plain, watching flames creep across the grass, knowing that the animals ahead would have no choice but to run straight into your ambush. It was both terrifying and brilliant, a symbol of how far survival had come, but becoming skilled predators came with its own risks. The same lions and hyenas that once chased humans now recognized them as competitors. There were times when a kill drew unwanted attention, and predators swooped in to steal the prize. Humans had to fight not just to hunt, but to keep what they had earned. This constant tug-of-war sharpened their need for vigilance. The turning point of survival wasn't a permanent victory, it was a fragile balance, tested daily. And still, humor found its place even here. Picture a group dragging back their hard-won antelope, only to have a pack of hyenas show up, laughing in the night. Someone must have muttered the prehistoric equivalent of, "Great, we did all the work, and now we're catering dinner for the neighbors." Survival may have been brutal, but laughter lightened the burden, just as it does today. The impact of this transformation stretched beyond the hunt. Once food supplies became more reliable, humans had time for other things. They could sit longer at their fires, sharing stories, experimenting with new tools, or simply resting without fear of immediate starvation. This breathing space allowed culture to grow. Art, ritual, music, all of these seeds were planted in the soil of survival. Without the mastery of tracking and strategy, none of it would have been possible. The turning point also reshaped relationships within the group. Cooperation became more valuable than dominance. A lone hero might kill a rabbit, but only a coordinated team could bring down a bison. Trust, communication, and shared memory became as essential as spares. In this way, survival wasn't just about defeating nature, it was about strengthening bonds between people. The roots of community grew deeper with every hunt. And yet, the lessons of patience and observation were never forgotten. Even as strategies grew more complex, the core skills remained the same: read the land, follow the signs, endure the chase. These lessons became traditions, passed down like treasures. A boy crouched beside his father, tracing a footprint in the dirt. A girl listened as her grandmother explained why the vultures circled overhead. Knowledge was inheritance, and it bound generations together as tightly as any bloodline. It is almost poetic to realize that this turning point, this mastery of tracking prey, was not just about survival in the moment. It was the first step toward humanity's larger destiny. The ability to see patterns, to make predictions, to plan and cooperate. These were the very skills that would one day lead to farming, to cities, to civilizations, and even to the technologies that define modern life. The patience of the hunt became the patience of discovery. The strategy of the chase became the strategy of invention. As the firelight flickered on their faces, early humans may not have understood the scale of their achievement. They only knew that they were no longer helpless wanderers. They were hunters who could bend the rhythm of the land to their advantage. They had crossed an invisible threshold, one that would forever separate them from the other creatures of the earth. So the story closes on a moment of triumph, not loud or dramatic, but steady and profound. The hunters sit by their fire, bellies full, their minds turning over the day's lessons. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new dangers, new chases across the endless plains. But they know now that they have a weapon greater than claws or teeth. They have patience, memory, and strategy. They have begun to master survival itself. And in that mastery lies the dawn of everything yet to come.